Good morning.
Good morning.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. We are studying about the Intertestamental Period of history. We are on lesson 4. Move it down here to the proper slide where we begin today. We'll be in Daniel chapter 10 and 11, but actually we start in 11. We start in 11, but we go back to 10 in figuring out what is going on with Daniel in this vision that he has seen that apparently there isn't. Well, we'll just go through it. We're concerned more about the interpretation of the vision and what they are in the vision itself. But so far, what have we looked at? We've looked at King Nebuchadnezzar's dream and interpretation in Daniel chapter 2. We've looked at the 4 beasts, and that was what? Daniel chapter 7. Then last week we looked at the ram and the goat, which was Daniel chapter 8. Now we're going to go up to chapter 11, and this is a vision about the kings of the south and the north, and in particular Antiochus or Epiphanes. I don't have 4 in there, but we talked a little bit about him and what's going to happen later on in history. I don't want to spoil the climax for us at this time. So, Daniel chapter 11 and verse 1, it says, "As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." Unless we keep it in context, we're not going to know who's speaking, who's being spoken to, what's being spoken about. So if you're just starting there, who would you assume is being spoken, who would you assume is doing the speaking? You'd assume Daniel's doing the speaking. But that's wrong. Daniel's not doing the speaking. Daniel's the one being spoken to, because 10 and 11 kind of go together. So we'll drop back and do an overview of chapter 10. And that's why I have it on the screen there. An overview of Daniel 10. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to hit some important parts so we understand what chapter 11 is about. So, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. The word was true, and it was a great conflict. All right? And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. All right. 3rd year of King Cyrus. What year then is that? When did Cyrus come into power, so to speak? Okay. Remember, the Babylonian Empire was the huge empire. These are the ones who destroyed Jerusalem. The 3 exile periods, 606, 596. Finally, 586, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. The final exile, so to speak, of the Jews from Jerusalem. The temple is destroyed. But from 606, 70 years later, you have Cyrus is now in power. The Persians and Medes, or the Medes and the Persians, have destroyed the Babylonian Empire, or at least have taken over. And that was in 539 BC. And Cyrus was the one who led this. So you have that change. And 539 BC is when this change takes place, that where Babylon was exiling people, the Persians believed we need to let these people go back and worship their God in their home country. But it's not only for the Jews, it was for anybody who had been exiled. They could go back. So Cyrus is going to let them go back and rebuild the temple. Eventually they could rebuild the city of Jerusalem. They could have their own country back. They'd have governors, and at some point they'd actually have their own people being governors. They'd have some freedom, but they'd still be a vassal state. That's the period of time we're getting into. So in the third year of King Cyrus, who's over all, right, that would be 536, correct? 539, Cyrus is now the emperor. He's in control of the whole world, or at least that part of the world. The decree of Cyrus was a source of great joy to the exiles, and this revelation to Daniel was a source of great distress. See what it says there in verse 1? It was a great conflict. In other words, it was a great distress. And we've seen a couple times, Daniel sees a vision, or there's a vision to come, and what? He's sick, or he's in mourning. He's in bed for a couple weeks because of what he sees and what is going to happen. But he understood the word, and he had an understanding of the vision. Now, he could have an understanding of the vision without having an understanding of the interpretation. Just like King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a dream, and he saw that statue. He knew what it was, but he didn't know what it meant. And I think that's the same thing that's being implied here. Daniel had this vision. He knew what the vision was. He understood the vision, but he didn't quite get the understanding of it. He knew something terrible was going to happen in the future. He just didn't know what it was. So, in those days, I, Daniel, was in mourning for 3 weeks. That's verse 2. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. And on the 24th day of the first month, I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man. Okay? He sees a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from the Epiphanes around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Okay? Was this before or after the vision that put him in mourning for 3 weeks?
That's after.
I say that.
It's after, isn't it? he sees this vision, he's mourning for 3 weeks, and then he finally gets up and he goes out on the riverbank, and then what does he see? He sees this vision. So what is going to happen here? This image of a man who would reveal the meaning of the vision that traumatized Daniel. Now we drop down to verse 14, and in that verse it says, and came, this man is talking about himself, and I say man, keep that in context, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. Right, so do you catch that? This is specifically aimed at the plight of the Jews, the Judeans, the nation. All right? Notice they're not called God's people, and they're not called the Lord's people. What are they called? Your people. Why is that? Because he's specifying a nation that has been unfaithful and has actually opposed the faithful. In other words, they've fallen back into that pattern for the most part, like in the days of the judges. Remember the cycles? Here they are again. They're falling away. So how's this messenger going to explain it? Well, the messenger reverts to the fall of Babylon 3 years previously in 539 BC. This is happening in 536. He goes back to 539. And this is where Daniel chapter 11, starting with verse 1, comes into play. And if we go back, what it's saying here is, and as for me, this is the messenger speaking to Daniel, and as for me, in the first year of Darius, or Darius, however you want to pronounce it, okay, the Mede. Well, who was he? All right, the Persians and the Medes destroy the Babylonian Empire. They were connected. They were in cahoots. All right? And Cyrus was the lead guy, but when they take Babylon, he puts Darius the Mede as king over what was formerly Babylon. So he's a secondary king. He's a king over an area, but he's not over, Cyrus is over him, but he's ruling that area. Follow me? Just like
A governor.
when you come to the first century, or yeah, we'll say first century BC, Caesar's over the Roman Empire, but Herod is king over Judea. Same concept there. So what's he saying? Verses 1 and 2, the first part of verse 2, and as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. So the messenger was providentially standing with the appointed ruler of conquered Babylon, not the overarching Medo-Persian Empire, but this one little section, and that's where Daniel was. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and this is where the majority of those who are going to go back from exile to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, or rebuild the temple and then rebuild Jerusalem, that's where they're coming from. in chapter 5, verses 30 and 31 explains this. And that was when the destruction of Babylon happened. And we remember Belshazzar was the king who was in place of, he was a secondary king. His father was over the Babylonian Empire at that time, but he was off. He left things in his son's hands, and his son had this party and all. The handwriting on the wall, meanie, meanie, tickle you farson, right? That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So that sets the time frame. That sets the historical account. This is where Daniel was. Hey, Cyrus has made the decree. The Judeans get to go back, rebuild the temple, and we're going to get to rebuild the city. And here's the time periods. But, you know, we've already seen those time periods. The rulers of the world, so to speak, change. And in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, they're glorious, right? Because he's looking at it from a worldly perspective. But in Daniel's vision, they're beasts. They were terrible looking beasts. And now, whatever this vision is that he has had that's going to be explained to him, it puts him in bed for 3 weeks. He can't eat, can't drink. It's a wonder he's still alive. He says, I'm going to tell you the truth. And what we have here, some scholars will say, is the predicted power shift. And now I will show you the truth. The future of Judea is at hand here. He's going to show Daniel the truth. The future of Judea as a state would be embroiled in the power struggle between Persia and Greece. So this Babylon's gone. Persia is the power, but Persia and Greece. This isn't even talking down at the Roman Empire. This is talking about what happens in that period of time of Persia and Greece and the change that takes place there. There's going to be some terrible things happen for Judea. Persia would be led by 3 more kings. Let's go and see if we can pick this up. Yeah, look at verse 2. Now I'll show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th. All right. And again, we won't read all of this. We want to catch the important part of it and what's going on. So there's going to be 3 more kings. Who's the king in Persia at this time? Cyrus. Okay? So there's going to be 3 more kings. That would be Cambyses, Darius I, Hystaspes, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and then Xerxes the first, who in the Bible's called Ahasuerus, who that's Esther and Mordecai. We'll talk about Mordecai tonight, Lord willing, seeing if that storm doesn't come in. Okay? But that's the time period there. That's Xerxes. And Xerxes is the 4th king. If you're counting Cyrus, say, then Xerxes is going to be the 4th king. There will be other kings after Xerxes in the Persian Empire. Don't, but Xerxes is the one who is the main feature here. Because what does he do? And we talked about this a little bit last week. Xerxes tries to attack Greece in 480 BC. And I've told you before, that was one of the first things I learned in world history in school. Because it seems like we wanted to start with Western civilization. And if you're going to start with Western civilization, basically you're going to say, oh, this is when the Greek states got together, and Alexander the Great then, starts his empire, and that's when, boy, everything flourishes under the Greek. When you get all those Greek city-states working together. I don't know why. But that's just the way it is. But it was a failed attack. He had a great army, a great navy, and he attacks, but it fails. And they push him back, but that allows Philip of Macedon, Alexander's father, to unite the Greeks. And then at his death, Alexander takes over, and boy, remember, he is the goat, right? With the one horn that just sweeps from the west and just whoosh, comes in and takes over. But Xerxes' failed attack is that beginning period. That's kind of the start of where you see shifts in history. What we know that the Greeks start an empire, but what's the beginning of that? Where does that start? Well, here's where it starts. This is where Persia starts to lose and the Greeks start to pick up power. And if you were someone like Daniel, who under the Persians knew that Judea was going to have religious liberty and somewhat of a freedom in their own country, it's like what we're going through now. What's going to happen in the next 20 years? Are we going to have religious freedom? Are we going to be able, is everything going to be controlled from Washington, D.C. or from somewhere in Europe? See what I'm saying? Changes take place. This is where it starts. So, after the death of Alexander, the empire was split into 4 subdivisions, and we talked a little bit about that last week, I believe. The Antigonid Empire, which was Greece and Macedon, ruled by Antiochus. And that's what I told you last week. The ones I had up there just didn't, I don't know where those names, they probably came from something different. But you have the Antigonid, Greece and Macedon, Thrace, and much of Asia Minor ruled by Lysimachus, the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy, and the Seleucid Empire ruled by Seleucus, which made up the former Achaemenid Empire, which was basically old Persia. So, there you go. There's an act. And I put this up there at the end last week to show. Now, again, Bible students would understand what is going on here in biblical history. All right? So here is Judea and Jerusalem here. So this over here is basically where Babylon, over in this area, Assyria was up in here, Syria, this area, right? So with the ram being going from east to west, that was the Persian Empire. With the goat coming with the one horn that just decimates that ram, That's Alexander coming from here. Now here's the Hellespont, and I believe right in here is where Xerxes had crossed, put his ships together so he could march his armies across and go into here and go down and try to take Greece. But he failed. And I mentioned a couple of battles. I think Thermopylae was one of them. But again, you have the Spartans. And I think the movie, the 400, kind of talks about that. But this was the division. This would be Macedon. This would be Greece. Now you have the Seleucid Empire. Here you have the Ptolemies. And at first, the Ptolemies had what we would call the Promised Land. I don't want to call it the Holy Land, but the Promised Land. Now, for today, modern times, what is the saying that the Palestinians are marching under? You know what that phrase is?
Across the sea, under the free.
No. From the river
That's
to the sea, Palestine must be free.
it. Yeah.
And we assume that is what?
The Jordan River.
Jordan River. Sea to the Jordan River. I suggest to you that's not what it means. Look at the map. From the sea to the river. The Muslim lands with Persia, modern day Iran, being the premier head of the empire. A restoration of the Persian Empire under Islam. They want to retake everything that was at one time Muslim, under Muslim control. What they believe is if it was under Muslim control, it should always be under Muslim control. Right? All of this. And over, clear up. Remember, they tried to go through Spain. They took a lot of Spain. El Cid stopped them one time. And they made another attempt. They got clear up into France before Charles the Hammer, Charlemagne. Well, I'm sorry, it was Charles Martel, his father, but he helped Charlemagne. Charles the Great stopped him. They want it all back. From the river to the sea. Okay, so you understand, and what Daniel is seeing, what's going to happen to this area, Judea, when the Persian Empire falls to the Greeks, the Grecian Empire, and then Alexander dies. And that empire is divided into these four kingdoms or empires. These two start fighting. In fact, what eventually ends this, what eventually ends the whole Greek Empire is these two start fighting for this. But really, the Seleucids want to take over this whole area. And they kind of win. They get control of this area of Judea. And that's where Antiochus for Epiphanes comes into play. But he decides, I want the rest of it. And when he goes up here to attack, he gets a good portion until, you see this little boot here? You know what that is? That's Italy, and Rome's up here. Rome comes in and saves Europe. And that's the beginning of the Roman Empire, which will overtake the Grecian Empire. Okay, you understand what's going on then, and what's happening that Daniel is seeing. So let's get back to it here. The kings of the north and the kings of the south. And when it talks about the kings of the north and the kings of the south, it's from the Judean perspective. The south is Ptolemy, and the north is the Seleucids. And they're constantly fighting. And in verses 5 through 20, we're not going to read down through them. That would take some time. You can read it on your own if you're truly interested in it. It depicts a complex, extended conflict between the kings of the south and the north. It starts before Antiochus for Epiphanes. Because that's way down in like we'll say it's close to 200 BC. I could give you more dates if I look to be more specific, but close to 200 BC. In Daniel 11, 21 through 35, now we get to talking about Antiochus for Epiphanes. And that's the important part, and this is where it really causes Daniel to have these problems, where it's almost like he's you think about Daniel, and at this point, he's probably close to 90 years old. And this has got to be wearing on him. He was a teenager in 606, and now you're talking 70 years later. He's close to 90. And it's just like, it drains him. Let's see what we got here. We'll try to get through it quickly. It's the contemptible and self-exalting king. A contemptible king, later revealed as Antiochus for Epiphanes. He's noted for deception and manipulation. Excuse me. He exerts a heavy-handed control over the glorious land. Let's see, can we pick that out here? Down close to verse 35. It talks about things going back and forth, north and south and such. Do you see it right offhand where it says the glorious land?
Verse 41.
41?
Yeah.
Yeah. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hands. Yeah, he's going, and what he's going to do. Let me just finish with what I've got here. So his sacrilege and persecution cause intense tribulation, but also engenders a fierce resistance. So it's at this time, and what we talked about, the Maccabees, the period of the Maccabees, that's when they arise. Because what he does, he becomes the civil ruler. When he drives the Ptolemies out, he appoints a political leader, and he decides he's going to appoint the religious leaders. So he demotes or takes away the high priest, and he appoints a new high priest, one that'll be for him. And the priests don't like it, so there's the priest out of these Maccabees that decides to start a guerrilla warfare. And they gather an army and they start an insurrection, and they fight for quite a period of time before Antiochus Epiphanes decides he's going to go up and to the west and try to take Greece. He hears something bad is happening up there, so he withdraws his forces. That leaves the Maccabees to be able to drive the ones that are left who are ruling over Judea for Antiochus, for Epiphanes, drive them out. But the Romans drive Antiochus Epiphanes out of Asia Minor and back. He goes back across the Euphrates River, back in that area. But at that time, that's when these priests then also take political control of Judea, and that's where we talk about the Hasmonean kings, which that's not supposed to be with God's people. The king is supposed to be from Judah, tribe of Judah, priests from Levi, but here now you have a priest, the Levite being priest and king. And that causes an internal problem in Judea. So Daniel is seeing all of this stuff. And that's what this contemptible, self-exalting king, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, does in Judea. Verses 36 through 45, the self-exalting king who is interpreted in various ways by scholars, okay? And, of course, it'll talk about tribulations. They'll want to make that, we'll put that clear down at the time of Christ and the destruction of Jerusalem. It doesn't work out. It can't work out because there's going to be an overcoming of it. And one more slide will help us. So the overriding factor seems to be that the end of the Ptolemaic and Seleucid conflict sets in quicker motion the end of the Grecian Empire and the establishment of the Roman Empire. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Grecian Empire was pretty bad, but what's the Roman Empire going to be like? When you have the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, and then the vision that Daniel had of the beast, it's going to be even worse. It's no wonder Daniel's in the shape he's in at that time. So concerning the history of Judea in context with these previous visions, it is formed in a period of religious freedom under the Medes and Persians. It suffers political and religious persecution under the Grecian Empire. It will lead to political and religious persecution and eventual destruction under the Roman Empire. You see, we got freedom, we're going to be oppressed, and we're going to be destroyed. Or at least Judah is. And that's why we see Daniel was in mourning for 3 weeks after seeing this vision. That was about a half an hour, maybe a little over half an hour. What do you think? Does that explain a lot of history without going into detail? And you can look, if you read those 2 chapters, you'll see a lot of that. And if you just read it without that context, it'd be, what in the world's, who's being talking? Who's doing the talking here? What's going on? Got to read the two together, read them in context with the other visions, and then throw in what we know about history. And we come up with, here it is. There's what Daniel sees. All right.